Welcome. As I said, a stock or a share or equity is such a new thing for most people that even people who actually trade it don't pause to see the power of it. So what I'm going to try to do now in the next 15-20 minutes is give you a sense of how you would think about the pricing of a stock, how would you value it. So the first thing I want to introduce is some ideas about the pricing. So the main goal is how is the stock priced. I'm going to give you some concepts or more some ways of thinking about it. So P naught is the price of a stock today. Quick question. Do you know this? If you go to buy a stock, should you know this? Answer is absolutely. You should know how much you're paying for something. So it's, in that sense, it's like the price of a banana. But it's really fascinating though. So the price of a stock today we'll call P0. The price tomorrow we'll call P1. No big deal. However, the word expected, remember now I'm pulling risk into the main part of our brains, a little bit more active. Next week we'll start talking about it pretty actively. So the expected stock price, why? Because I do not know it today. And if you do, you don't need this class. Everybody's trying to figure it out, and we'll talk about that too. But let's call that P1. Let's assume that the expected dividend at the end of year is div 1. Remember, I told you, dividend is like a coupon. The only difference is what? It's not a contract. So if a company doesn't pay dividend, it doesn't mean anything. Whereas if you promise to pay a coupon and you don't, it's a contract and you're effectively in default. Okay? Again, why expected? Because time one hasn't happened as yet. Now, I'm going to show you a timeline again, but a stock is expected to live a very long time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do one period at a time. And the reason I'm doing it is because it's very reasonable to think of something one period at a time than a whole long stretched timeline. Having said that, let's draw the timeline because it's important to understand what the heck is going on. So very clearly, I'm standing P0 and the goal is to try to figure P0. i.e., how would I value a stock? Stock goes on what? Hopefully, when you issue stock, you don't want it to stop. You're the entrepreneur. By the way, every entrepreneur should think like that they'll live forever. Their idea will live forever. Okay? So you go on. What have I done now? Instead of trying to look forward and figuring it all out once, I'm putting it into bite-sized pieces. So I'm forcing you to think of only this first period. Okay? So for the time being, just ignore the future. But keep this timeline at the back of your mind. That the future is there, but I'm just ignoring it for the time being. But actually I'm not. And you'll see the key to that in a second. Okay? So let's see if we get this right. Turns out, if you're thinking one period at a time, the price today will be dividend at the end of 1 year, plus what? The price at the end of the 1 year. Remember what I told you. What you could do is, you could say, man, I don't want to deal with this long period of time. I'm going to sell this stock after 1 year and try to figure out what price today should be. Now, turns out, does this make sense? Sure. Imagine this is the last year or last 6 months of your coupon paying bond. What is the first thing? The coupon. What is the second thing? The face value. The difference is that you do not know the price of your stock 1 year from now, or sorry, 6 months from now. Whereas if you had a government bond, or a corporate bond and you had only 6 months left, you know that P1 is what? $1,000 or $100, whatever the face value is. Does this help, right? So you are now in a zone where you know that you have to somehow figure out what the value of dividend and price is in the future. Not an easy challenge, but as I said, today we'll focus on what the heck is going on, and then we'll start using numbers. Okay, so what is expected P1, right? So remember, and I'm going to write this, that P naught is equal to div 1 plus P1, but in which period is this? If I hold it for one period, I have to discount it by 1 plus R. Let's just talk about cash flows and discount rates. Do you think I've gotten both in the formula? Answer is yes. Dividend is one form of cash flow. What is the other form of cash flow? Me selling the stock. Okay? R. What is R? Remember, R is what? The best alternative investment of the same risk. So if you are evaluating, say, Kmart, you cannot use the stock of Apple to figure out what the rate of return should be. They are different animals. And we'll explicitly get into it when we talk about risk. So the question I'm asking is, what is this P1? So imagine thinking in the head of P1. What is P1 thinking? It's one period forward. What would P1 be? I'll let you pause and think about it. Again, time travel to time 1. What would P1 be? Go one period at a time. Think about it. What would P1 be? P1 will be very similar to P0, but removed how many periods? One period. So P1 should be this, and I'm going to write it, and you see if you agree. So have you seen comic books, right? And there's what is Snoopy thinking? So if P1 is a comic character, what is it thinking? Who am I? It's Googling, who the heck am I? P1 has to be the present value of what's expected at the end of the second year, right? We're going logically. So what is div 2? What dividend will be at the end of period 2? What is price 2? What will the price if I sell it at the end of the second year? But now what do I have to do? I have to bring it back to year 1, so I discount by 1 plus R. Does this make sense? I hope it does, because this is key to understanding stock pricing. In some senses, it's a building block approach to what we already know. Whenever you have a tough problem, break it up into bite-sized pieces. The key element here is, please do not forget that this is all expected. We are ignoring risk explicitly, but the fact that something is expected means this is not known today. So let me ask you this. Standing today, do you know div 1? No, it's 1 year from now. And unlike a coupon, it's not promised. Do you know P1? No. In fact, P1 is even more complicated than div 1. Why? Because when you think about P1, what is P1? P1 is what div 2 plus P2 would be discounted one period back to year 1. And I apologize, I used a cap R. Let me use a lowercase r to be consistent. And while I'm doing it, what is the assumption I've made? That the per period rate of return built into the pricing of this stock, whether it's IBM share or Google's, is not changing. And you can, that's a strong assumption, but imagine you're standing today, you don't even know for sure what's the rate of return for 1 year. Figuring it out, how will it be different in year 2 is a little bit tricky. So we are going to assume that the rate of return, which is largely based on the riskiness of this animal, is roughly stable and the same. Okay? So let us see what is P0 then. So you just saw that I've given you a flavor of thinking. So tell me, what will P naught be? Let's modify P naught. And by the way, I'm going slow here simply because this example, simple quote unquote derivation, is the most famous formula ever in finance. And finance is the most awesome thing. So it has to be the most famous formula, even more famous than E equals mc square. Okay? Take it or leave it. I believe it. So P naught will be what? Let's write it. Is div 1 stay the same? Yep. Because I'm just staring at the numerator, at the top part of this equation. So remember, I'm substituting for P1. So let's substitute for P1 plus div 2, sorry, I'm forgetting the I in this, divided by 1 plus R. So I've substituted for P2, but what do I have to do? I have now to discount the whole thing by 1 plus R. So what have I done? I've just taken the value imagined about what P1 would be and substituted it. Can I expand? Sure I can. So let's do it. I'm a little cramped for space, but we'll manage. Dividend in period 1 will be divided by how much? Notice I'm dividing by 1 plus R. 1 plus R, why? Why not R? Because this is a 1 period discounting. That was easy. But now what do I have? I have div 2 divided by 1 plus R and P2 divided by 1 plus R to bring it to P1, right? But now I have to discount it twice, right? So why? Because div 2 is how many periods from now? 2 periods from now. So look how cool this formula is. It makes so much sense. It's div 2 divided by 1 plus R divided by 1 plus R, which is 1 plus R square, plus P2 divided by 1 plus R square. Isn't this so logical? So think about it. Think about it now in the following way. What would be the price of this stock if I suddenly changed and added one more period in my mind? So earlier we had started off with what? In this specific formula, we had done the thought experiment that we are going to sell the stock after 1 year. Let's do the thought experiment that we are going to keep the stock for 2 years. What would be the price today? Well, it has to be the present value of what's happening in the 2 years. In the first year, the stock will give a dividend, 1, and I'll discount it for only 1 period. In the second year, it will give dividend 2, discounted by 2 periods, therefore 1 plus R square. And also, I'll sell the stock for P2, 1 plus R square, because it's 2 periods away. This is so logical. That's what I love about finance. There's no, bringing in some other factors suddenly that we never heard of before. It's tough, it's difficult, but it's very logical. And the difficulty and the toughness of this example is not coming because of some profound mathematical thing. It's coming from a simple fact. Quick question, do I know div 1? Remember, I'm standing today, P naught. Do I know div 1? No, I don't know div 1. Do I know div 2? No, I don't know div 2. Do I know P2? Heck, I don't know P2. Right? So actually, if you look about it, I should do this. What does E stand for? The expectation that I have today. Similarly this, and similarly this. I am expecting to get paid, or if I get paid, this is my expected value. This is so important that it's not for sure, and therefore talking about stocks without talking about risk is kind of pointless. But I'm not going to be explicit about risk except the fact that these are not real things. These are what I expect. Quick question. during the technology boom, something dramatic happened. And it was the following. Firms used to pay dividends regularly in the firms that are existing in the world at that point. And suddenly, lot of technology firms and lot of dividends are not being paid. And we'll see why. But look what has happened as a result. Would you call a stock any kind of contract? No. But what's fascinating about it is that if you really understand what a stock is, you understand what value creation is. Because the tragedy of a bond is, it cannot be a participant in value creation, I mean a beneficiary, because it has agreed to give money only with a contract in hand. So who gets to gain from the value creation? Stockholders. Who gets to lose from lack of value creation of an idea? Again, the stockholders. And who's the ultimate stockholder? The entrepreneur who starts it all. So I'm going to show you some further developments of this formula, but I want to make sure that we are all on the same page. So I have done this, and this is what the formula continues. If you keep substituting in the future and go from 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to n, this is what the formula looks like. Hopefully you can do it on your own. In fact, this is the one time I would encourage you to take a long break to mimic and understand what's written over there. Create your own notes, think through this, be careful, but not too careful where you're not getting the non-expressible beauty of what a stock is. So what is the stock? Imagine now you're holding the stock for n periods. What is the coupon? Not for sure, but that it could be paid is div. How many of them? N of them. Are they being discounted appropriately? Yes. Because if the period is 2, you're discounting by 1 plus r square. If the period is n, you're discounting by 1 plus rn. What the heck is Pn? Pn is the price at which you expect to sell the stock after n periods, right? So I've separated the two out. The first, and by the way, don't get too worried about that summation sign. The first is just summing up all the dividends and discounting by the period. So if n is 1, that means you're discounting 1 period and so on. And I have separated out Pn from this whole thing. And the reason is very simple. If you think about this, and this is 20 years or 20 periods, and it's the bond we talked about, what is div 1? In our example, the coupon was $30. Coupon. Known? Yes. What was Pn for a bond? It was $1,000. Known in advance, and we call it at face value. Why? Because it's written on the face of the thing, right on the IOU. $1,000. Now what's the difference between this and this? So even if there are 26-month periods left, the first is I don't know whether the dividend will be paid or not. If so, by how much? I certainly don't know what price I'll be selling it at. Let me ask you this. What will Pn be? Will Pn be anything to do with the past or the future? Well, Pn itself, if you have finance in your blood, which I'm sure you do, will be the present value at that time of everything beyond period n. So let me ask you this. Let's keep expanding. Let's come to the first most important concept or formula plus concept plus beauty of a stock. What is the price of a stock if n is extremely large? In other words, the stock is expected to live for a fairly long period of time. Imagine how long has Ford been around? Long time. So when n is large, what will happen to the value of Pn today? Let's stare at this and we'll be done in a second. What will happen to this as n becomes close to this guy? What is this guy called in math? Infinity, meaning very far away, right? What will happen to this? This guy will tend to 0. Why? Because of pause compounding. So what are you left with? You're left with finite parts of this, and that's what this formula is called. And we are going to take a break in a second, but I want to show you what this amounts to as n goes to infinity. And this, by the way, is the most famous formula I have ever seen, and it's ingrained in my being. And that is, the price of a stock today is the present value of a bunch of dividends way out into the future. And the reason there is no finite price in the end is because its present value is essentially going to be 0. Does everybody get this? Please spend time on this. Please think about it. I have gone through the concept, and now I'll go through the example upon example upon example. And the reason I'm going to do examples is twofold. You need to internalize this. And also, stocks are the most fascinating way of showing value generation people could have thought of. Because there's no contract, there's only expectations, there's risk-taking, and there's value creation. See you in a little while or a long while, depending on how you feel. I would encourage you to read, think, before doing the examples we do together. See you soon.